Welcome to Tambellini Group's Women in Technology Spotlight Series. In these interviews, we showcase the career paths, perspectives, and accomplishments of the remarkable women shaping technology in higher education. And today we are lucky enough to be joined by Bryan, who serves as the CIO of James Madison University. Welcome, Robin.
Thanks, Liz. It's nice to be here.
We're so glad to have you. I know you've had a wealth of experience over a long and successful career. So let's start with thinking back to before you were even in college or thinking about what to major in. What did you think you wanted to be when you grew up and why?
I grew up in Western Maryland, kind of very small community in the mountains, and I wanted to be a doctor. And so I was blessed to be born to a family that valued education, working class, but valued education. And particularly my father, who pretty much told my mother early on that if we can only educate one child, it's going to be the daughter. And
Wow.
my father very much was invested in making sure that I had opportunities and would be able to be independent. He, in that era, we're talking, I was born in 1959, so I'll give my age away. But in that era, women were really just kind of finding their way, and he wanted his daughter to never have to depend on anyone. So I wanted to be a doctor. I picked my undergraduate. It was never an issue of going to college. It was where would I go to college. So it was ingrained in me from, the time that I was small that I would go to college. And so I picked a small liberal arts college because they had a high acceptance rate to med school. And I guess in my sophomore year, I took organic chemistry. And those kids in lab were so competitive that if you just even said to one of the others, is this the results you got on your lab? They would lie to you and say, no. And I'd do it over again and get the same result. So it came to me really clearly as, because in that same time frame in life, you're learning about yourself. I learned that I was not that competitive, not to that degree. And so I went and talked to my advisor and said, I'm not sure I want to do this anymore. And he said, major in something you enjoy, which was history. So I majored in history and political science. My dad kept saying, and what are you going to do with that? What kind of job can you get with that? And so, but I graduated with a degree in history and political science, and I came to JMU to work on my master's in modern European history. So I thought I was going to work for the State Department, move to Northern Virginia, and if worse came to worse, I'd get a PhD and teach history. So always thinking that career plan. But I had one computer class, which you'll find kind of interesting in college. This is back in the card days, and it was taught by a physics professor, Liz, and I hated it.
Can you say when you say the card days, what does that mean?
Everything was based on, punch cards.
Oh, okay.
And yes, so you had to punch these cards and run them through systems and, to get things. And it was just awful. And it was taught by a physics professor. So you can see what its niche was. And, I had taken the class because I wanted, just have some idea about what it was all about, but it was awful. So, when I decided to come to JMU to get my master's degree, I was looking for part-time work and I found a job in computer operations and I took it because it was in the evening. So I could go to school during the day, study at night, and I loaded tapes and processed cards and ran jobs, ran batch jobs. So that was my entry into IT.
Wow. So it's funny talking about being a liberal arts major and everything. I've talked to some CIOs who say those are some of the best hires they've ever made because of that background that they had. And you were one of the few people I've heard of, though, who actually very early on in their, you know, education, post-secondary education and career took a computer class. And you walked away with you didn't like it. So
And
how did you go from, getting this advanced degree in, I think you said modern European history, to um, where you are now? Can you tell us a little bit more about your career path?
sure. I was working in computer ops, working, like I said, on my degree and trying to write my thesis. And PCs kind of started becoming more prevalent. So I'm really dating myself. So mid 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and they were starting to come on campus. So we had a student legacy system that had never been, exposed beyond offices like the registrar's office, and they wanted to provide access to the academic departments. When they looked around IT, they couldn't find anyone who had the kind of personality it would take to go
Mm-hmm.
out and work with these folks. A lot of them were, back then they were called secretaries, but admin assistants. They were taking away their typewriters and plopping IBM PCs on their desks. And for really that first year, I spent a lot of time just holding their hands and telling them it would be okay.
Wow.
Then I taught them how to use, the PC to access the student system. I started extracting data from it, putting it in DBase. I'm really dating myself now, DBase, and helping them make use of that data then to do what they needed to do. And so I was in IT for about 8.5 years when the university registrar recruited me to come to her office as associate registrar. So I went to the registrar's office. I was there for probably 3 years when JMU's users revolted against IT and felt like the legacy systems weren't meeting their needs and they didn't feel like they were being heard. IT in that era kind of acted like gods on the hill,
Mm-hmm.
come to us on your knees and ask us for what you want, and we may or may not grant it.
And all
Um,
our infinite technology wisdom that you have no
yes,
knowledge about, right?
exactly. And so the university created a report called a university at risk, saying
Mm-hmm.
that the legacy systems really wouldn't sustain us as we needed to move forward. And so I became part of what it turned out to be the PeopleSoft Student System Beta project,
Wow.
where 7 institutions, I started out in that role as the functional lead for the student beta part. So traveled all over the country, worked with some really great colleagues at other institutions that were part of that beta process. Um, PeopleSoft at the time picked 7 schools that were representative of types of universities they wanted the software to be able to meet their needs of. And
Okay.
so JMU was one of those. So traveled all over, spent a lot of time in Pleasanton, California, trying to help inform the software. And then JMU ended up being the first to implement the software. We implemented admissions on the beta even before it was a general release and went through all of that process. Through that, I was given the developers. I ended up then being the director of information systems, which and doing the same process of trying to bring that data along. We went live with all of that student software in 99,
Mm-hmm.
and we're one of the first in the country to really use it all. So I ended up back in IT and have been there ever since.
That is a really cool story of being really a pioneer on the cutting edge. Um, what does a week in the life of your job look like now? I mean, it's funny to hear you say there was this sort of revolt that these legacy systems weren't serving us. I sense a recurrent theme, perhaps, with some things we're seeing today. So, bringing it all full circle, how does your job look now? What are you doing on a daily basis?
Yeah, it's a lot of problem solving, but
Mm-hmm.
really, I think here's one of those places where the history degree matters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so many of my courses, they would always emphasize if you don't learn from history, you're destined to relive it.
Right.
And I can tell you that user revolt, that university at risk, was a real eye opener for me because what I realized is, you do have to learn. You can't let that same kind of situation occur where your customers don't feel served or
Mm-hmm.
your constituents don't feel served. So that's really been a big tenet for me, where I have focused on collaboration, um, relationship building, creating advisory groups that I work very closely with to make sure we were staying in alignment, focus very much on that. But in the CIO role, it's problem solving, it's engaging with university leadership so that they
Mm-hmm.
understand the potential of technology and understand what it costs, but also, what it takes to be successful using these technologies, and trying to make sure that we're serving the students that are coming here to be educated. And at JMU, we care very much about the full experience so that we want enlightened citizens as well. We feel like that's our contribution to society. So it really is that. It's about mentoring others in IT, helping them grow, because I've had so many opportunities that have been given to me because, I worked hard and was willing to try to do new things. And some of my biggest advocates have been very conservative men who um, embraced what others didn't necessarily like, and that was being direct and assertive on
Mm-hmm.
some occasions. I had someone tell me one time, Liz, that I need to be in the military because I should learn that you shouldn't question everything. So that's part of what I do
Mm-hmm.
today too. I question, you know, how does this technology benefit people? How do we, make this stuff better? How can we help the university be more efficient? So it's mentoring and trying to bring along those folks behind me, serving university leadership and making sure we're aligned to really serve students. I spend a lot of time in meetings. I spend a lot of time talking to people, trying to understand their needs, trying to make sure we're fitting what we do to what they do, and trying to help our leadership understand the potential of technology.
And you talk about a lot of what some call the soft skills there, like the interpersonal skills and other things, and definitely such a huge and important part of the job. But in the day to day, it can be hard to see the results from that. So,
Yes.
on that note, a two-part question for you. First part being, what do you like most about your job? And can you tell us about a recent project or accomplishment that you're particularly proud of in your role?
I like seeing our technology truly benefit the people who are serving the students. And Um, I guess other than the PeopleSoft beta project, which was huge, I mean, I spent 5 years working 7 days a week, which people won't do now, I promise you, and, helping implement that software. But I always swore I'd never do it again, but we're doing it again. We launched a project that's really a digital transformation project where we're going to replace everything, plus also implement enterprise-wide CRM
Mm-hmm.
and replace our identity access management system, replace our student finance HR systems, implement a higher degree of data analytics, and focus on a data-centric culture. We're calling the program Reengineering Madison, and I'll plug Tambellini. You guys have been key in helping us formulate that project, and we've worked very closely with Tambellini in trying to pull Reengineering Madison together. I knew we needed CRM here, Liz, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have champions on the user side. And like I said, I learned a long time ago that IT alone cannot drive change and the kind of technology we need to be successful. So those partnerships are important. I always had champions for CRM on the admissions side and on the advancement side, but I never really had that champion on the student big piece. And we have that now. So we're very close to purchasing our enterprise-wide CRM system. We bought integrated integration tools, iPass. We're close to figuring out which identity and access management system we want. So over this next 7 years, we'll be really transforming all of our technology. And what's different now is have folks convinced that we can be more efficient, that we can look at all these processes that, kind of bog us down sometimes and really help transform higher ed. So at least starting here, I believe we have a good chance of really offering students the kind of interactions with technology that they expect today. Um, our students have grown up with technology, so they're not easily impressed,
No.
And COVID taught us that kind of synergy, bringing everything together, so they're not having to worry about what they're doing. Things like case management. That was
Right.
not really something that was, a huge initiative for us before that. We were able to handle student problems and student situations. But during COVID, we were getting questions, complex questions that case management CRM will help us solve. So
Wow.
reengineering Madison, I'm going to end my career kind of where I started it
Yeah.
with a big project. Yeah,
A gargantuan one at that. I mean,
it
I
is.
it seems to me like doing that today, as complicated as that was in the beginning when you're literally building what is this going to look like for schools, but now with all the various potential of it, it's great, but it's also it can be overwhelming. So
It is. And
kudos
so
on
now
that.
I'm focused on change management also. How do we
Mhm.
prepare people with the PeopleSoft stuff? And I think here's that history thing again. I watched people struggle with change. And so I'm a little more in tune to that now. So we've invested in a change management philosophy. We're training folks all over campus so we really can benefit from the change that the systems will offer us and the opportunities rather than try to make the software be how JMU is. We're willing to accept those best practices and look at ways that we can use the technology to change what can change with keeping that same focus on quality teaching and service.
Yes. You talked about, the change management comes through the understanding of the history of what this involves and how people react to big initiatives like that. But on the flip side of that, let's talk a little bit about the future. So, if you could have this all-knowing genie come down and answer for you one question about the future of technology in higher education, what is something that history can't teach you that you would like to know?
Yeah. Are we going to stay in the cloud?
Hmm.
In a lot of ways, because of where I started in my career, Liz,
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of mainframe computers and dumb terminals. And, really with the advent of moving to the cloud and the web, it's kind of like that again,
Right.
to where, the processing is happening somewhere else, and I keep seeing these cycles and things. So I'm curious of, are these technologies really going to help us? Are they going to end up coming back? Are there going to be a breach? Is there going to be an internet issue that causes everyone to pull it all home again, where we've
Yeah.
spent all this time trying to push things to the cloud? The other thing I'm interested in is AI, artificial intelligence. I mean, is it going to make an impact for us in, service beyond things like chatbots and things like that, which have huge potential, obviously. Um, those kinds of things. I'm interested, will higher ed embrace the technology that'll help us be more efficient? Because sometimes it's an uphill battle as we try to convince folks that there are better ways of doing these things. And I mean, are we going to still have big ERP?
Right.
Is it going to end up a bunch of small applications that are best of breed, or are we going to end up still in this kind of model where we're trying to, do the best we can with systems that meet our basic needs? Is that too much to want to know?
No, no, it's interesting saying, are we going to stay in the cloud though? I mean, do you think that the pendulum may swing backwards and people may want to go back to on premise just because
That's
of
what I don't know because,
okay.
like I said, what I've seen is if you watch long enough, it'll kind of come back. And, will there be something? Because, security, obviously, that's a big part of my job that it's not my favorite part, and I wish I didn't have to be
Hmm.
as concerned about ensuring that we're securing our data and all. I just wonder, is there going to be a breach that causes everyone to say, bring it home, or
Hmm.
some failure in the internet? Because, with all our systems there, if something happens and we can't get to those applications, we're still going to have to function. That's what makes some of us older timers uncomfortable, is you can't really control it.
That's true. You have a lot of built-in dependencies that you didn't
You do.
before.
Absolutely.
Well, let's close on something that I'm sure you've been given a lot of advice, solicited and unsolicited, good
Yes.
and bad. But is there one piece of advice that someone's given you that's really helped you in your career, especially being in such a visible leadership role where things are constantly changing, and when something goes wrong, it can be very, easy for people to say, well, it's IT's fault or other things.
Yes.
Like how do you deal with that pressure? What have you been told that helps you get through the day to day and see the big projects?
Yeah. Well, someone told me a long time ago, higher ed is not a hospital. No
Okay.
one's going to die. Okay. So that helped me with the stress
Yeah.
because I do kind of, but I think the biggest thing is assume nothing. No news does not mean good news.
Hmm.
You've got to get out there, engage with the folks that you're working with, make sure you're partnering with your academic unit heads, your deans, the leaders on your campus and otherwise, and listen very closely because they'll tell you what they need. They may not be able to articulate it in
Hmm.
such a way, but if you're listening, you'll see where those opportunities are, where you can advance and do things, best. And the other thing was one of my very first bosses told me, until you can find someone else to own the problem, you own the problem.
Mm.
So keeping that service cycle to where folks don't feel like what they ask you goes into a black hole, that they do get answers, that you own it, and that you kind of create that kind of culture, I think has really helped us here. We're fairly decentralized, centralized at JMU, where a
Okay.
lot of institutions, I mean, we have folks with technology skills out, in the colleges, but really, we have an awful lot of influence, and you just want to be a good steward of that.
Yeah, I like that advice. It's not a hospital. I mean, we've got to always zoom back and put it in perspective.
Yes. Yes.
Well, Robin, thank you so much for making the time for us today. I really appreciate all that you've shared with us.
Well, you're very welcome, Liz. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.